Welcome back to another Boxscore Geek show. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez. You can find me pretty much everywhere as Nerd Numbers. And with me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. And it's the off season. We don't have a lot to say, but guess what? We are experts. We are the Kobe Bryants of podcasting, and that what we lack in efficiency, we make up for in volume. And we'll have a lot to talk about today, Brian. So, yeah, any thoughts before we get going and talk even more about Carmelo Anthony and even DeMarcus Cousins?
Yeah, speaking of the dog days of the offseason, it was pointed out on Reddit today that is the midway point of the offseason. It has been 65 days since the NBA Finals ended, and there are 65 more days until the season starts. The preseason's starting in less than 2 months, Dre, so I don't know. I think it's coming up pretty soon. I'm excited.
The good news, too, and this does seem like a really nice thing that is starting to catch up, by the way, is the WNBA. They just had their All-Star game, which we said looked great. It is looking to be really good, and it is one of those things. I know Patrick's actually working really hard on the numbers. Unlike me, his city actually has a WNBA squad.
They were in first place earlier this year. Do you know if they still are? I hope so.
I'll take a look. And then even unlike us, we have a G League team in Oshkosh, which is nearby, and there was a point where I was debating watching Jabari Parker play there, but I never did. Okay, so the Seattle Storm are indeed still in first place. So Brian's got a hot ticket on his hands.
Got lucky there.
Yeah, good memory. I mean, they're up now. The good news for you is they're up by a good margin. So it's one of those like I'm guessing they're up by at least 2 games. So you would have had to have been really out of the loop. Although, holy cow. The Atlanta Dream and the Washington Mystics. I said Mystic last show, so sorry about that. It's the Mystics, plural, which is a bummer. By the way, this is it's a funny trivia question that you can kick ass with the WNBA, Brian, is teams that aren't plural, that don't have an S at the end. But you have the Storm, the Dream, the Sun, the Mercury, the Lynx, and the Sky and the Fever. So that is... Just as an FYI, if you ever want to beat someone, you're like, name North American sports teams that don't end in S. They'll forget WNBA. You can make some money. So
it's a pet peeve of mine. I hate teams without an S at the end of the name. Like they just forgot what plural is, but that's okay.
Like the Chicago Sky, they should have been the Skies. Multiple. Anyway.
Sure. Well, I mean, what does that mean? It's just nonsensical. Are they just like hydrogen? Is that what the team is? I don't understand.
So it's the off season, and Brian's working on his stand-up material on the show. So thanks for tuning in.
I mean, I'm serious. This is a concern.
All right. Anyway, moving on. That actually works really well. So we've got 3 topics today. We'll see how long they go. The first I titled "Who Cares?" It's just the news of the NBA, and kind of as we noted last week, as soon as Clint Capella signed, which. By the way, there was never any drama to the Clint Capella story, as we noted on 2 weeks ago. I was on vacation last week, Brian, but 2 weeks ago, we talked Clint Capella signing with the Houston Rockets, and we kind of noted it was a foregone conclusion that he was playing in Houston this year. The only real question was he going to sign a below market value qualifying offer, and that's possibly drama. But there was never, ever, ever, ever any fear that Clint Capella wasn't going to suit up for the Rockets. So as soon as he signed that contract, it was over. That was the kind of the end of the offseason news. The only other story which we'll talk is Carmelo Anthony. We'll get there in a second. We're going to talk some Andre Iguodala. He's one of my favorite players, and he made one of my favorite statements ever, Brian, which we'll agree with. And then we're going to actually, you know what I figured, Brian, this is a fun exercise in futility because I'm not going to do a full-blown post on it. I've talked about how it's such a waste of time to even try and do it. And while I've respected the Boxscore Geeks for doing it in the past, we're going to talk the NBA win totals for the season and, just have some fun with it. But note it as such that it's some fun because, as I've said, despite the fact that that's how the Boxscore Geeks actually started, years after the fact, I'm like, no, it's a stupid thing to do. All right. Housekeeping. Carmelo Anthony finally signed with Houston. What the hell? I mean, we've known it was coming, but this was just one of those, like, feels very soap opera-y or bad movie-y. We're like, don't do it. There's a good Paula Poundstone joke about Hoosiers where she says, she's kind of stupid how she'll watch Hoosiers again and she'll always wonder if they're going to win the big game, despite the fact that it's a movie and she's seen it before. It's the same way we knew it was coming. Wojnarowski, even with our bashing how sometimes he kind of tries to plant stories, it was such a foregone conclusion that we knew it was coming, that now that it's come, we're just kind of like, well, we were hoping you'd get out of it. The good news, it occurred to me, Brian, 3 seasons ago or 2 seasons ago, I forget how to frame it, the Houston Rockets made a really bizarre error on what we call our part, in that they let Dwight Howard walk and signed Eric Gordon and Ryan Anderson. And we were kind of like, this is a bad thing. The next season, they went on to win 55 games. Now, part of it, Patrick noted very astutely, Clint Capella is a great player, so he was going to take Dwight Howard's minutes, and that was fine. As always, they had James Harden, who's an amazing player, and, he went off. So it's like they were still okay with it. And so they're kind of in the same boat with Melo, where I don't feel this is going to cost them a top playoff seed. I think they are one of the top 4 teams out west. I just feel very similar to Eric Gordon last year, ironically, as we've noted, that this is a maneuver that could cost them in the playoffs. And by the way, lo and behold, Carmelo Anthony, he definitely cost the Oklahoma City Thunder in the playoffs. Now, last season, what is important to notice about the Oklahoma City Thunder is, despite the fact that they had the better seed than the Utah Jazz in the playoffs, on paper, they were a worse squad. I've liked how Dave Barry's brought this up before in past. For instance, the oldest one that no one will even give a damn about, Brian, is when Bill Walton and the Portland Trailblazers beat Dr. J's Philadelphia 76ers, they actually had a better SRS. Similarly, when the Detroit Pistons upset, I'll put in quotes, the Los Angeles Lakers, they actually had a better SRS on paper. So it's the same thing. The Utah Jazz on paper were a better squad than the Oklahoma City Thunder. And when we factored in injuries, we talked this last week, where if you take Robertson off the Thunder and you put a healthy Gobert back on Utah, it was even bigger. But Carmelo Anthony was absolutely atrocious in the playoffs last season, and it actually went to 6 games. So it's a case where had they not had Carmelo Anthony, had they actually had Nerlens Noel, they could have actually given the Utah Jazz a fighting shot in the playoffs. So we're kind of in the same boat here, where if Melo's getting 20 to 30 minutes in the playoffs against the Golden State Warriors or the Utah Jazz or the Oklahoma City Thunder or the San Antonio Spurs, that could be enough to cost the Houston Rockets. So it's a funny one where this team might win 55 to 60 games, no problem. They might coast to it again. And people will think we'll look silly. And the funny thing is, we're just kind of going, it's a landmine. We've brought this concept before a lot. If you have a bad player on your team, that team could potentially harm you when you don't need it. And that's what we think about Melo.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And, I said similar things the last few weeks. And, you said earlier when you were talking about, what's with the timing, this wasn't a surprise at all. Well, there was some news coming out today that went along with the reports that he had finally signed. Well, let's go to the Washington Post we have here, that I think might have explained some of it. And their headline was, Carmelo Anthony finally appears to be willing to come off the bench. So I guess it's being reported now that they're letting him compete for a starting job, but that in the end it's going to be D'Antoni's decision, and they could bench Anthony or, reduce his role. So maybe that was the sticking point for the Rockets, is, getting him to say, yeah, okay, maybe I can take less of a role. And that's good news for Rockets fans, right? I just don't think there's a lot of upside for him at his age. The upside really is, again, we talked about this in previous weeks, but just him being Chris Paul's buddy and, wanting to have Chris Paul's friend on the team. It could work out for the Rockets. If they really do limit his minutes, maybe it won't impact them very much. But like you said, there's that small chance that maybe they'll give him a ton of run in the playoffs. Happened with Eric Gordon last year, and that could be the difference, in a 7-game series with a team like the Warriors. Well,
so as a stupid comparison, if you think of like world-class running or world-class swimming or any race-like system, if we're honest with ourselves, which sounds really weird, essentially all of these athletes are the same statistically, right? If we're really doing a 99,
compared to everyone in the world, right? All basketball players.
But so I guess my point is, when you start talking about top tier athletes, right? A swimmer, a tenth of a second or even less, right? A millisecond can be the difference of everything. And so you want to reduce the number of things that could impact that, because it does come down to luck and favorable conditions, but it's such a thin margin. And that is our point with NBA teams. Like, the Warriors last year, we thought signing Nick Young was a mistake. And the thing is, they were strong enough that they were probably able to get through that, which they did. But it's like you are competing against some of the best teams in the league. And if you just have a few off nights, that's everything. So why on earth would you increase the number of things that could give you off nights? And signing Melo just is that. And I mean, the fact that everybody's having to go, well, maybe if this and if this and if this and if this, I mean, it's like, yes, there's a lot of things that could bounce the right way, but now we're getting to luck territory. But as you mentioned, we've done this 3 weeks in a row now talking Melo because we've been expecting it and it took forever. And, the coming off the bench thing is definitely fascinating because he said he wasn't willing to do that in OKC. But what I'll also give Melo is just a note, and he's always seemed very good at this. The real annoying thing, I'm going to get to go off on another tangent in a second here, Brian, is on the court, especially given the fact that I'm a Denver Nuggets fan, we've always been very critical of Melo. We've basically said he is an overpaid scorer. He takes more shots than he should. He basically harms his team. If the funny thing about him coming to D'Antoni is D'Antoni, don't forget, got the Knicks to be a 54-win squad, had Linsanity, and Melo basically dismantled that, if we're honest with ourselves. So I'm surprised D'Antoni was on board with all of that. But the thing is, that's critical of us with Melo on the court. But off the court, I've called him, and this is a piece I've had on the back burner for I think a decade now almost. Not a full decade. Couldn't be a decade, but 5 years at least. Where I've just said Melo is the perfect wages of wins player. In that there are two ways to use Dave Barry's research, which is the book The Wages of Wins, second book Stumbling on Wins, grandfather of the site Boxscore Geeks, which is what should teams be looking for to make a team that wins games, the Moneyball approach. The other alternative to look at that is what should players do to maximize their career earnings? We'll see who ends up the winner here. I think LeBron James, just due to longevity, which is bizarre, is going to win this. But as of now, Carmelo Anthony has made the most money on NBA contracts of players in the 2003 draft. That is remarkable. Melo has always been very good and astute at what gets him paid, taking shots, not coming off the bench. And even if he was saying to OKC, I'm not going to come off the bench, that could have just been an argument tactic to get himself traded in a position to get to a big market team, because he might even know, even if I'm not good, if I have one good year on the Rockets, and don't forget the Rockets are in Texas with no state income tax. If I have one good year there and they own my rights, that could be a big payday. So Melo, in terms of not being a basketball player, just being both a human being and a businessman, we have really liked him. So that is always the disparity. And the same comes down to Donovan Mitchell. There have been a bunch of great offseason stories about Donovan Mitchell being a great guy off the court. And it's fucking annoying, to be honest, Brian, because I'm like, I am insulting Donovan Mitchell for not being able to shoot a ball through a hoop 2% better from three. If we are being 100% honest, I am saying on a weekly show, I come on and say, in 100 attempts, this guy misses 2 more threes than he should, and as such, he's overpaid or overrated. In this case, overrated, not overpaid, overrated. As compared to off the court, him doing a bunch of good stuff and seeming like a funny guy and having a good sense of humor and all that. That is always the frustrating and annoying part about basketball. So to the Melo point, it just gets funny where, yeah, it's like, it's the why do we care? The sports night, why do we care thing. I even put it as who cares. The billionaire owner of a $1 billion NBA franchise and Daryl Morey, who is a successful GM who's been paid millions and still has a job after this, everybody's going to be fine. The thing is, Houston has just dinged their shot a couple of percentages of being able to take home an NBA title, which is what it is.
Yeah, and I like your point about Anthony, who is 34 now, I think, trying to get one last contract, right? This is DeMarcus Cousins, who's a lot younger, has basically said he's trying to do this. He feels like after, being injured, basically, instead of trying to sign a max deal, also a lot of teams don't have money right now, he's going to rehabilitate his basketball image on the court this season and then next season try to sign a big deal, right? Maybe Anthony saw what Cousins is doing and said the same thing. He was hurt last year and he kind of got benched in the playoffs, I think, for playing bad, rightfully so, it turns out. Maybe, if he can play well in a bench role, he thinks he can get another deal. So we'll see.
Well, another interesting aspect, and I just noted that to you, right? Carmelo Anthony is the highest paid athlete in terms of NBA contracts of the 2003 draft thus far. And I mean, there is a point that he's made over $200 million on the court, kind of, right? You take out the agent fee, you take out taxes, you take out all that other stuff. It's probably like much less than 100, like 20 million or something. And then
gross
and stuff. But like, you can hit a point where it's like, I don't need this. And I was saying the same thing about Draymond Green and Klay Thompson, where it's like, when you don't have a title or multiple titles, absolutely, I'm going to play for a title. I'm going to be a team guy. After you got a couple titles, you might go for something else. So Melo might say, I don't need to play on the Thunder. I want to play with a friend, Chris Paul. I want a good shot at a title. Who knows his motivations? So whatever he wants to do at this point, he's earned it in his career. As I think we talked it a few weeks ago, like, he's obviously a Hall of Fame player. It was such a bizarre thing to come up. The only other piece of news that you put on is that the Knicks are going to waive Joakim Noah. Another player, same boat as Melo, where we can just go like, fantastic job getting paid, Noah. I have no idea what the hell Phil Jackson was thinking. Who knows if he'll ever be good again? We will see what happens. I wouldn't really.
I got a different take here, actually, Dre. But no, finish up. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I'll tell you what. I actually need to stall while I look up his stats on BoxscoreGeeks.com. So why don't you do your point and I'll take a look.
No, I think that yes, Noah has been hurt. He has not played very many minutes the past few seasons, especially on the Knicks, but he's still been pretty good per minute when he has played. He is, again, similar age to Anthony. Maybe he's only 33, but he's just been an absolute stud his whole career, not just, maybe had a couple good years like Anthony. So I think teams should be all over Noah if he's healthy. I think, contending teams should try to add him and put him into their rotation. This is being overlooked, I think, as a valuable player.
Well, just so we're clear, he played 40 minutes last season, 1,000 minutes the season before, 630 minutes the season before. I wouldn't be thrilled about any of that, but to kind of an interesting thing that we talk about a lot on the show, gambles worth taking versus gambles that aren't. Like, for instance,
that's right.
Marcus Cousins, we think, is a great gamble worth taking. Melo is not a gamble worth taking. If you get Noah for minimum, which I think is less than $1 million, which sounds weird.
Well, the Knicks are going to stretch him, so the Knicks will be paying him while some other team pays him the minimum, right?
Yeah, it's not a horrible gamble to take, especially for teams in a weird position. I'll be honest, if he looks like he's healthy and can work out, the Warriors could do what they basically did, which was they kind of piecemealed the center together out of a bunch of older players that, couldn't, any one of them, like JaVale McGee as an example, couldn't stay on the court 36 minutes, but, JaVale McGee plus Zaza Pachulia, plus like David West is baffling. The three of them could, make a center. So it's kind of the same thing here. Even they could say, we'll give you the veterans minimum. You're an insurance policy. Yeah, I'd agree. It's not a horrible
Boston Celtics wouldn't be a bad spot either. There's several contending teams that could use him, I think.
Yeah, just as an insurance policy if an older center gets hurt. I agree. Another thing to not care about. So this is weird. Lets me get off on another tangent. Michael Porter Jr., who was signed by the Nuggets, who says he feels pain-free. So we'll see. Another risk worth taking. Like the photo on Instagram that was insulting Luka Doncic. And I don't even know the full details and haven't looked up much more than that, but I just wanted to use this as an excuse to talk about a point that we bring up quite frequently, which is that the NBA and a lot of American professional sports have turned themselves into professional wrestling. They've adapted a lot of the qualities that the WWE used in the 1980s to rise to prominence. Well, and in fact, professional wrestling, its entire run has done, which is, you want to build up feuds between people, individuals, right? That's what's huge. That was a huge pivot that Dave Barry has brought up in the NBA's marketing, which is before the 1980s and before the ABA, the American Basketball Association, the NBA tried to do the team structure, basically very football-y, right? You're going to go watch the 76ers play the Celtics. A big change was when you're going to go watch Bird play Magic. You're going to go plush Michael Jordan square off against, how did I just drop his name? Patrick Ewing. That was a major shift. And now in the social media era, it is very much the same way, where Joel Embiid is roasting Hassan Whiteside on Twitter, or we build stories out of this. So it is very much the off season. It is very much professional wrestling, where the only way, we make mountains out of molehills here. And I think it gets into an interesting feedback loop where I think the players participate. And honestly, we bring up this other point a lot too, Brian, which is, like, in wrestling, you have these people that use their real names or close to their real names. Like Chris Jericho goes by Chris Jericho outside of the ring, despite what his born name was. And you play this character, and there's a really weird question of, like, how much does that impact you, right? Because if you're pretending to be someone with the same name as you and you're acting as you, how much does that eventually mess you up? One of the most famous rivalries in wrestling is Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels. And at least according to the history, they were friends and colleagues at first, and they kept getting told over and over, say these mean things about each other, and eventually they hated each other off the court as well as on the court. But it's because you have to play this character where you're hating everybody. So just to the same point, the NBA uses a lot of the same tactics as that. We have to show rivalries and backbiting amongst our athletes. And I really, it's just a question on the back of my head, Brian, just a great off-season tangent to have on the show, where it's like, how much does this start to influence the athletes, where because they're participating essentially in theater, right? Don't forget Donovan Mitchell was playing the Ben Simmons as a rookie. How much does that eventually impact actual relationships and attitudes of players long term?
No, and you're right, everything you said there. It's worth noting for this story, though, that Porter himself has renounced the remarks. He said he was just clicking on stuff on social media, and he contacted him, Doncic, that is, right away, to tell him that he loved him and thought he was a great player. So, unfortunately, we didn't quite get the heat we wanted from this.
By the way, I'll say this. There was a funny article at Cracked recently that was talking about like annoying things that racists keep doing. And one of the things that they brought up is this, just like the weird back out of, that wasn't me that did it, right? One of my aides liked that tweet, not even just racism, just like in general foibles, right? I remember Ted Cruz liked a pornographic tweet and then said, "Oh, that wasn't me. That was my aides." It gets so frustrating in the social media age of stuff that is very obviously the person. It's like, you're telling me, I'm not disbelieving people hacking your account. In fact, like, I know on Twitter once that happened with me, where my account got hacked and like I made 3 tweets about vitamin supplements. And so, of course, I changed my password and deleted the tweets, and that was that. And, a few people were like, I think your account was hacked. I've seen people on Skype, right? You get a message from someone on Skype you haven't talked to in a while, and it's just like, hey, and it's a random link, and if you click on the link, it's, malware or something. There are definitely cases of people hacking social media accounts, but someone logged into my account and clicked on this, or I wasn't even thinking and I accidentally liked it. I hate that crap so much. If it was up long enough for someone to realize it and make a story out of it, it's just like, it's another thing too that we talked about on the Donovan Mitchell story, where he's commented to me and I'm nobody, right? Like that is the key, right? If you are a second round pick in the NBA, you're going to get like 50,000 followers on Twitter just by lieu of being in the NBA. I've been blogging for almost a decade and I have 5,000 followers. In the realm of the NBA world, I am nothing, but there is still enough searching that Donovan Mitchell does that he was aware of what I've said about him and had to fight back. We've seen Kobe fight back with, an Instagram follower with like a few hundred. We've seen Melo do the same. It's very clear that athletes name check themselves, search themselves, have opinions. And I don't know the solution, honestly. Actually, let's use that as a jumping off point to get into the next story, because you've brought this up, Brian. I love it. There's a very real trap for athletes being honest. And so that's the annoying part with Michael Porter Jr. He can't just say, yeah, you know what? I think I should have gone higher if it weren't for that stupid injury in college, right? We fuck the NCAA, right? This is Michael Porter Jr. is an example of like, what did he gain? He went to college, got injured, and just hurt his draft stock. Because I'm actually curious about this. One of the things I love, Brian, is that at Basketball Reference, I believe they actually have like what your high school rank was. It's something I would love to have done something about. He was the number 2 recruiting rank in 2017. He was picked in the 2018 NBA draft 14th, and that was considered like that was a controversial pick by the Nuggets, right? And lo and behold, the Nuggets are doing what they did, it was just one of those weird things where if the Nuggets were lower, they might have picked them 23rd. It's just one of those. They weren't going to gain anything trading down, right? No one's going to give up much for that range. So it's kind of one of those. He lost many, many draft picks to go to college, and he might be bitter that, Luka Doncic got paid and all this, and he's not allowed to be honest. If he's honest, then people get mad, and it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't. Another case in point, Kevin Durant is one of the most fantastic scorers in NBA history. And in fact, I hate Steph Curry a little for this, Brian. I hate love. It's a very Lou Gehrig, Babe Ruth case, very Mickey Mantle, Joe. I almost said Joe DiMaggio. It's a Mickey Mantle. How am I dropping his name? Guy that got 61 home runs.
Oh, Roger Maris. Yeah.
Boom, on the ball. Thank you, Brian. It's a very Mickey Mantle, Roger Maris scenario where, if you recall a few years ago, I'm just waxing effusive about how Kevin Durant is the most impressive scorer in NBA history. He's putting up numbers we haven't seen since the 80s. In terms of net points, that's the thing we like to do, which is where you're factoring in volume plus efficiency. An amazing scorer, and basically he looked like the most amazing scorer ever. And then Steph Curry came along, and you're like, holy cow. And somewhat annoyingly, them on a team together is going to slightly diminish both of their legacies because there's only one ball. But that being said, we love Kevin Durant. So Andre Iguodala came about, and I'm going to see if I can read this quote quick enough. So Andre Iguodala said, people don't, I love this, by the way, random thing. I wish the web didn't do top down where it fills in, because I absolutely hate going to a site, seeing what you want, and then something popping up. I really wish it went bottom up so stuff didn't move, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, so Andre Iguodala said, people don't appreciate him enough. He's the most talented scorer of all time. Now, I love this comment, and I'm actually going to defend him. Hands down, he's walking 30 points. He'll get 30 on 12 shot. That's very, very hard to do. Very efficient. Most guys don't need to feel the ball in their hands a lot to get a rhythm. He doesn't. Michael Jordan and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar were two guys with unstoppable move. MJ had the fadeaway, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had the skyhook. But KD is a 7-footer who can hit a hezzy pull-up. Hezzy pull. Well, I guess I'm not hip like the youngins, even though Andre Iguodala I think is the same age as me. He can hit a hezzy pull-up from 50 feet out. That is his unstoppable move. Now, I love Andre Iguodala. He's the only NBA jersey I have. I have his Denver Nuggets jersey. I love Andre Iguodala. This is such a smart comment, right? Because he brings up the other two players. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is the all-time scoring leader. Obviously, Michael Jordan is the one. But this is just absolutely right? Kevin Durant is the most versatile, volumist, whatever you want to call it, scorer in NBA history. This is such a good comment. And I think Andre Iguodala is right. I think the annoying thing, we just talked about theater. One of the most renowned wrestlers of all time is Bret Hart. And he's called the excellence of execution. And, as those of you know, there's going to be a lot of wrestling on the show this week. Sorry. Wrestling is predetermined. But the thing about wrestling that's important is that, you can think Cirque du Soleil, you can think figure skating, you can think many other things where you have to be able to perform a certain move set that is very hard and very skilled to do. And Bret Hart is well known as being one of the best at this. Here's the thing, and I've talked to you about this before, Brian. If you go back in time and watch old Bret Hart matches, if you ignore the promotion part, they're called promos in wrestling, and that's where the two wrestlers talk. And, someone says, on Sunday, I'm going to do this. And someone else says, on Sunday, he said this, but I'm going to do this. And last time this happened, blah, blah, I was screwed out because of the ref, whatever. That's a huge part of wrestling. And as I noted, is becoming a huge part of the NBA. Players talking about each other. And in fact, it's always been, right? The interviews, all that stuff. It's very much a part of sports that professional sports wisely adopted. Bret Hart was amazing in the ring. His mic skills were lacking, and if you listen to interviews, he would agree with that. He would actually say that was one of his weaknesses. And if you compare him to other people of his time, Shawn Michaels, Stone Cold Steve Austin, he is just nowhere close in terms of mic skills. And I think Kevin Durant's very much the same way. On the court, he is one of the most impressive dynamic scorers we have ever seen. And in fact, I think pretty much if you break it down, it's him and Dirk Nowitzki on the list of 7-footers that can score from three, really, if we're honest with ourselves. But off the court, we've seen this. The number of times he has got into social media gaffes, having burner accounts, saying stupid stuff. So it's a funny one, and I love Andre Iguodala for this point because I think it's like if we never got to hear Kevin Durant talk, he would be much more performed. And by the way, in wrestling, there's a method you do with this. So one of the top wrestlers right now is Brock Lesnar, who is a beast. He was actually he's a UFC champion, so that means he can fight for real. He actually almost made the Minnesota Vikings as a football player. He's an absolute beast. He is not great at talking. And so what they've done in wrestling, they called getting a manager. They have someone named Paul Heyman, and Paul Heyman does the talking for him. Paul Heyman comes out and says, my client's going to do this. This is what's going to happen. And it's a fantastic technique in wrestling to basically deal with a player that can't talk. And what I would actually argue, too, is Michael Jordan, arguably that's part of his greatness. He had Sonny Vaccaro and the Nike brand around him for much of his career. I think in the social media era, Michael Jordan would be much diminished because he said a lot of stupid stuff. He did a lot of stupid things, but he had a very powerful brand around him that basically did the talking for him. You know, Spike Lee making commercials about you is a much better product than you telling people about your game. So I love Andre Iguodala for this because I think it is the truth that Kevin Durant, if we didn't see him off the court, our image of him would be much better. But because we do, people underrate it. But his stats are freaking astounding.
Yeah, and the damned if you do, damned if you don't part I like as well because, you know, who knows if Michael Porter meant to disrespect Doncic or not, but, you know, let's assume he did, right? He does what almost everyone does. He just said, oh, it was an accident, or they just try to not take credit for it, right, and just let it pass. I think celebrities have decided that's the easiest way to deal with it. Durant has done the opposite at times, though. He's admitted, he's like, yeah, I was pissed off about what someone did on social media, and I posted something about it, right? So he gets roasted for being honest. So really you just have to not go on social media, I guess, is the only way to avoid it. But then, of course, your agent's not going to like that very much. So, yeah, there's not really any way out of it. You're going to get criticized no matter what. So, you know, just be yourself.
Just be yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a tutorial. I sent you the link, Brian. So for those of you who don't know, I did this a while ago on Boxscore Geeks, one of the few things in development I've done in the last few years. So we have the player comparison engine, and you are actually able to use that to compare players' careers. And what I did is big part of that, the wins produced formula, is you compare against average. You normally do league average for the season, but if you're talking a player's career, I actually did it so that I aggregate the average player over that span of time. And so I think this is very, very important because if we compare Michael Jordan versus Kevin Durant, and we compare their career statistics, which I sent you, and you can look at efficiency, really should just be two tables, not tabs, but that's neither here nor there. Okay. Kevin Durant, for his career, has a true shooting percentage of 61.1%. Now, we do classify him as a wing. For what it's worth, I do put the two together. It says average wing. I do small forward, power forward, Brian. But in the same span of time, the average wing shot 54% true shooting. So Kevin Durant, 7.1% true shooting better than the average wing. Now, Michael Jordan, over the span of his career, now it is worth noting, by the way, and this would be a case where like doing a Bricado Prime-like tool would be useful, Brian. Add it to one of the million things on our back burner. Bricado Prime, for those that don't know, is a player's best 6 seasons. Logic behind it is average NBA career is about 6 seasons. The Bricado Prime says you take a player's best 6 seasons so you can adjust for things like if they were injured a season, which did happen to Michael Jordan during his prime, Kevin Durant as well, or they missed a year or just had an off year. Basically, it's kind of saying what was this player at their best? What did it look like? And it's a nice comparison tool to use. Not something we have yet, but something that's fun to do, right? You compare the best 6 seasons of Kevin Durant's career versus the best 6 seasons of Michael Jordan. That being because Michael Jordan, right, this 56.9% is going to include his 2 Washington Wizards years, which were horrible. But Michael Jordan, 56.9% true shooting, against an average wing of 53.1. And if you look at Michael Jordan's best seasons in terms of shooting efficiency, which isn't hard to do as well, you can just click on it. His true shooting percentage, his best season was in 1989, the year we thought he deserved MVP and didn't get it. His best year, 61.4%. So this isn't hard. Kevin Durant's average is only 0.3% worse than Michael Jordan's peak. And that is absolutely true. The Michael Jordan not as amazing of a scorer as Kevin Durant is just true, and that is fine. Because we were talking pre-show about this, right? Nick Wright, very much you compared him to Skip Bayless, Stephen A. Smith. I basically noted it's a hard position because I agree with that assessment. It's just unlike Stephen A. Smith and Skip Bayless, I actually agree with some of Nick Wright's takes.
Well, I should just say that was kind of off the cuff in the pre-show. To be honest, I have not watched very much Nick Wright, just a tiny bit. That's my first impression, so I don't really have too much judgment on him overall, officially.
but I mean, it's the thing that as we've just spent the first half of the show talking about, and have spent many previous shows talking about, and again, I'm stealing a video that I have to put up one of these days, just like a throwback Thursday, where they actually have this discussion about how major league sports in the United States basically steal a lot of techniques that Vince McMahon popularized in the 80s and 90s for wrestling. It's all theater. And so I completely lost my train of thought.
That's definitely what sports talk radio and whatnot is.
So Nick Wright doing it. It's theater, right? He is making promotion.
Absolutely.
And you make outrageous claims. And what's annoying is I feel sometimes we're lumped in with this, even though we're the stats guys, where we're like, we do have outrageous takes, but what we're doing is we're using the statistics and finding places where that deviates from mainstream perception. And that gets very rough because, I don't write a daily article or even a weekly article or a weekly tweet. Well, actually, I do. I do that a lot. Do make a lot of tweets about players that impress me, like LeBron James. Those don't get as much traction as though when you say Donovan Mitchell is overrated or DeMarcus Cousins is overrated. So there are a lot of people that basically are like, I'm going to make outrageous claims because I know that's going to get me eyeballs. And it strikes close to home because I think we do try and stay in that realm of we want to be grounded in statistics and analysis, but we're also aware that winds up with you making takes that are contrary. So Nick Wright is doing wrestling, right? He's making controversial takes that he knows is going to get attention. And so when this came out, this Andre Iguodala quote came out, Nick Wright started basically bashing him and saying, how dare you try and compare him to Michael Jordan? Michael Jordan's the best of all time. And that's just not true. And there are a few takes I want to give you. Now, the first is amusing to me is someone noted to me Michael Jordan dominated the paint in an era of amazing centers. And I love this take because it's true, but it's also funny because people put so much focus, like, Ben Simmons on, Ben Simmons can't make a three. If you look at Michael Jordan's career, he ended his career with a 32.7% average from three. That is atrocious. And what's worth noting in that, he got 2 seasons of a shortened three. So Michael Jordan basically had the bumper lanes on for 2 seasons of his career, and he still ended a horrible career average. Whereas, let's see, what is Kevin Durant's career three-point shooting? Let me get that up in front of me real quick. But he's an amazing three-point shot. I know that's the case.
Yeah, he's 38.4 career, according to Boxscore Geeks.
Freaking kidding. And for what it's worth, 41.9% last year. Kevin Durant is a freaking beast. So Michael Jordan just was not as versatile as a scorer as Kevin Durant. And then the more annoying point to me, and I could never find this quote from Steve Kerr, Brian, and if anybody wants to help us out, I would love it. Steve Kerr made like an off-the-cuff sarcastic remark because people were talking about the classic, could the Warriors beat the Bulls, right? Could the 2017 Warriors beat the 1996 Bulls? And Steve Kerr was like, yeah, well, pretty much basketball in the 90s reached its apex and it's just never gotten better because that's how things go, right? We stop advancing, we stop progressing. And I loved it. When you try and look up Steve Kerr quotes Bulls, Steve Kerr quotes, but he said so much, he's been around forever. It's harder to find. And I just, got tired after 3 or 4 Google searches, but I love that quote and wish I could find it.
Yeah, 90% of his media quotes these days are sarcastic, which is funny.
He's amazing. But what I'll just note about that is the reason Kevin Durant is better than Michael Jordan is because he came after Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan's era of basketball produced the modern era, and the modern era is better. And in fact, to get back to the Donovan Mitchell tangent that I always get on, one of the rough things about Donovan Mitchell and bashing him as a rookie is if you took Donovan Mitchell's rookie numbers and you transported him back in time to Kobe Bryant's rookie year, we would say Donovan Mitchell was an above average rookie. The problem is sports is a zero-sum game that gets better. And so if you shoot 33% from three, which was good in the 80s, but we reach the 2010s. I hate that there's not a good way to differentiate the 10s or whatever as a decade. where the league average is 35.5%. Well, it doesn't matter if you were a good rookie in the 90s. You're not a good rookie in the 2000s now or 2010s. So it's like there is progression. So the funny part to me about Nick Wright coming back against Andre Iguodala's quote is that shows a very lackadaisical way of thinking. We've talked about this before, where people kind of wax nostalgic about the past. And if you're honest with yourself, if you look at the past stats, you go, athletes in the past were not as good as modern athletes. And that's not to say, I'll bring up the classic time travel test that we always bring up. That's the offseason, Brian, which is you have two cases. You have one case, which is we get a time machine, we travel to 1996, we pluck the Bulls, we bring them to the modern era. We give them a couple months to prepare because they have to learn modern rules, modern schemes, maybe watch tape on modern teams. We give them that, we have them compete, and here's what's going to happen. And in fact, I'll be honest, you can give either team either set of rules, right? You can give the 2017 Warriors the 1990s rules, or you can give the 1990s Bulls the 2017 rules. But you give both teams adequate time to prepare for that, coaches time to coach. I'm sorry to tell you this. The Warriors are going to kick the crap out of that Bulls team. It's not going to be close at all. It is just not. And that is because this Warriors team has had years of improvements that were built by that 1990s team.
Yeah.
And the other alternative, though, is, and you've joked like the kidnapping thing, you kidnap the Bulls squad as youngins when they first start basketball. You transport them to 2005, maybe 2006. Let them train and progress up, learning with modern training, modern schemes, modern coaching. You put them together and you play. Who would win? That's a harder question. And I think the feel I know Arturo and myself have, I agree with Arturo Galletti, American Numbers on Twitter's take here, is that team would be able to compete. That the elite athletes in basketball, irrespective of generation, if they were given the same training and coaching, would be great across era. And I think that's true. Because, I mean, if you look at Wilt Chamberlain, Wilt Chamberlain versus Anthony Davis, you put them next to each other, they're going to look very similar. There is a point, Dave Barry brings it up, called like the short supply of small people. There are only so many people that are above 6'5", right, that have or have super long arms. Like Charles Barkley's 6'4", but he has like a 7'2" wingspan. There are only so many people that are both coordinated enough with wingspans and bodies big enough to do this, that the NBA just does not have enough talent where those players would not be successful regardless of generation. Now, the 10th man from the 1990s, he's screwed in the modern. He's out of the league. But the starting five on that Bulls squad, I think, could compete in the modern league. It's just a case where it's just so naive to say Michael Jordan was more talented than Kevin Durant when the numbers don't back that. And just the logic of the NBA has gotten better. All the numbers agree with that, right? I did that chart for the Great Lakes Analytics Sports Conference, where if you look at the 3-point shooting efficiency, it's just gotten better and better and better. Modern NBA players are just much better than this. And I think Iguodala's take is just spot on. It's very chess-like. I got down a rabbit hole with Bobby Fischer and Gary Kasparov recently. And by the way, this is just a tangent to those out there that might appreciate this. Bobby Fischer essentially retired from modern chess at age 29. That is so mind-boggling to me. Because imagine if LeBron James quit at 29, or Michael Jordan and LeBron James, neither of them had a ring at 29. Roger Federer is probably closest. I was looking at that like individual. I think he had like 14 of his 20 majors at 29. That is just such a remarkable thing. But the same point, Bobby Fischer absolutely dominated his era in chess. But if you took Bobby Fischer from 1970 and dropped him in 2000 against Magnus Carlsen, he's going to get his ass kicked.
Or Sam Shanklin, for that matter. Shout out to him. No.
So what
no, you're right. No, he won. He's a local guy who won the U.S. championship. We shouted out a few weeks ago.
Oh, good job. Yeah. It does make me feel bad, U.S. chess, where you're like Sam Shanklin. I mean, what? Let's. I'm curious about this now. I want to see FIDE. Oh, I typed die instead of FIDE. That's messed up. FIDE ranking. Sam Shanklin. I want to see that. But yeah, that's all I got there, Brian.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So, well, my first question is the link that I got from him. I'm not sure it's the right one. I can only see Kevin Durant here. I can't see him compared to Michael Jordan. So.
Okay, now what you can do in there is you can type in Michael Jordan as well, and it'll be career, and then hit enter.
Okay, let's do it live here.
Because this is a useful part of the box score geeks that I feel people don't know is because we have the career option, we have compared to average. So you can basically look and say, it's a fun one where just, possibly the easiest would be like if you do career, I would say the most fun because it's modern era and basically encapsulated is like compare Larry Bird to Kevin Durant. And it's not even going to be close. Larry Bird was thought of for a long time as the best three-point shooter in the NBA. And if you compare Larry Bird to Kevin Durant and look at their efficiencies, it's not even close, right? Larry Bird finished his career 56.4% true shooting. Now, this is actually impressive. 37.6% three-point shooting. It's actually damn impressive. Kevin Durant, 38.4% three-point shooting, 61.1% true shooting. And then if we look at the attempts, Larry Bird only took 2.4 three-point attempts per 48. So that's less than 2 a game. Kevin Durant, 6.3.
Yeah, the three-point shooting is obviously the biggest change, right? Like it took, almost a generation of players for them to grow up shooting the three to be able to come into the league and actually make them. We like to say that when the three-pointers did come in, whenever that was the early 80s, I guess, that only a few players actually even attempt them, like Larry Bird, then, like Chris Mullin and Reggie Miller eventually, and a few others, but it wasn't really that many. So it's not, I'd be interested to see like threes throughout the decades. I'm sure a million people have written about that, but attempts and efficiencies through the decades.
I need to get that up. I actually have the efficiency chart. And actually, if you look up a thing called Where Did All the Possessions Go, which I wrote for Boxscore Geeks, I actually have charts in that. But I mean, and that was what was funny to me is I had some people respond. They were like, well, Michael Jordan wasn't good at threes because they weren't a known thing in his era. And I'm like, well, yes, that is exactly the point of Andre Iguodala's point. It's like, if you're going to argue Michael Jordan didn't know how to do that because he hadn't been taught, and now Kevin Durant can do it because he's been taught, it's like, well, then you've basically conceded the point that Kevin Durant is a more skilled shooter than Michael Jordan. There's a multitude of reasons why, but that is it.
I think the shortened line is kind of an argument against Jordan in that respect, in that it's not like he was too proud to take threes and just decided not to. When he had a chance to take them, when the line was shorter, he was willing to, and took more and benefited from it. So he just wasn't training in threes. He wasn't good enough.
To be fair, and this is a very interesting point, like I know it comes up in regards to like Tracy McGrady, is if you're an athlete and you get older, you have to adjust your game because you can win on raw athleticism. Like that's the argument about like Dwight Howard, despite the fact that he stayed great. And it is, I could buy Michael Jordan changing up his game as he got older for shooting more threes, not just because they shortened the line, but because he's going, I'm older and it's not as easy for me to drive and hit as it was before. And of course, as people have noted correctly, the NBA with the hand check rule was a much more physical league. So it's like, it is possible you hit a point and that's just a wise strategy. So it's not necessarily saying he had a good reason to take threes or not. I do think it is just very obvious when you look at Charles Barkley and Michael Jordan as examples, two of the best players of their era. They just were not good at taking threes, and there's a million reasons why, but the modern NBA players can, and that's why it's, that's what bugged me about the Kevin Durant point, the damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? If Andre Iguodala says, Michael Jordan, the most skilled scorer of all time, but Kevin Durant's pretty good, he gets people yelling at him going, how dare you sell out your own teammate Kevin Durant? What are you talking about? Look at the stats, blah, blah, blah. If he says what he did, which we agree, calling a 4-time scoring champion that is one of the most efficient scorers in NBA history and is the only, it's him and Kevin Durant. That's what's stupid, right? You got, or did I just say him and himself? Kevin Durant and Dirk Nowitzki.
Me, myself, and I.
Yeah, me, myself, and I. Kevin Durant and Dirk Nowitzki are it. They're the only two 7-footers that are as versatile as scorers as they have been in NBA. So when you're on a list with two players and you're the modern version, right? We were just talking about how things have improved. Dirk Nowitzki is the 1990s version. I wrote an article about that where I was like, if the Dallas Mavericks with Dirk Nowitzki and Steve Nash had Mike D'Antoni, if this is a funny one, if Mike D'Antoni went back in time to just that squad and just said, we're just going to do Morey ball, we're going to do layups and threes, I think that team kicks the crap out of the NBA. I think they had all the talent and ability in that era to do it and just did not know. So that's a very funny one. Also,
I bet the defenses would not be as good at guarding the three back then. They weren't as ready for it. I mean, the rules are a little bit different too, so it's so tough to say, right, I think you're right, but it'd be interesting to see kind of the flow of events that led to things changing over the years. I think were, kind of natural, but To illustrate your point, though, I want to get into this a little now that we have Jordan up here with Durant. So what are their differences in true shooting, right, compared to the era? Well, Jordan versus the average wing of his era, 1985 to 2003, he's about 4% higher in true shooting, which is incredibly good, right? 4% higher than the average, like over time, just a ton points more. But then you look at Durant from 28 to 2018 versus the average wing, who has increased by 1% at that point, the average wing, up to 54% true shooting. Durant, however, is 61.1, so, a full 7 percentage points higher than a wing. Maybe he's a big and not a wing, so that's a little more questionable, but it's still pretty significant difference. And here's an even more interesting thing, is what goes into that true shooting, right? It's 2-point field goals, 3-point field goals, and then free throws, right? Those are the three components of true shooting. Well, Jordan and Durant are pretty close in 2-point field goals. Durant's 1.7 higher than him, but then he's way higher in 3-pointers and free throws. So he's done it, kind of the newer way, getting to the line and shooting threes, not taking these 2-point jumpers.
And I mean, yeah, there's nothing against that. I mean, that again, I was on the chess kick, and that's funny. There are lots of strategies that over years they're just like, yeah, you used to do this, we don't do this anymore, and it's just that's what happens with anything. And I think the amazing thing, the great thing about basketball, as compared to other outlets, is as long as we have 30 teams, or I would argue more than 10 teams, which we're always going to have, right? The NBA is never going to relegate itself by a third. If anything, they're going to expand. As long as you got more than 10 teams, just the simple fact that I believe virtually every person 7 feet or higher, the fun stat in the Sports Gene book about this is, if you see a 7-footer in basketball eligible age, right, 20 to 30 or something, 20 to 35 in the US. I forget the exact stat, but it's something like that. It's like, if you see a 7-footer between the ages of 20 and 35, there's a 1 in 10 chance they're in the NBA in the United States. Pretty much we are at the point where if it looks like you could play basketball, you are going to get a shot to play basketball. And we still have dominance because there are just not enough players or people to occupy that space. Whereas I think in terms of like baseball, because you get an advantage, because you get a bat, because you get a piece of wood, where there are probably players that don't look like they have any business hitting a home run. Now, that was Michael Lewis's point in Moneyball, that if you looked at the locker room of the Oakland A's, they didn't look like professional athletes. Golf's very similar too, right? Like a lot of professional golfers that are amazing, it's because you're given all of these tools that are able to hit a ball very hard. If you had to like throw it or hit it by your hand, a lot of these guys wouldn't go anywhere. Basketball is always going to remain a top-heavy dominant sport, and that is fantastic. But that also just means there is always, I think it's going to be interesting to see the development of the top players over time, because I don't think they've even peaked yet at this point. And even if they do peak, they're still always, it's still going to be interesting to see how they compare to the league, because the league is never going to be fair, at least not in our lifetimes. I'll make that prediction.
Yeah. No, well said. Well said. I'm ready for the next. What do we got here?
Well, we've talked for a while. We always joke about long show or not.
Oh, win totals. Yeah, win totals.
So I'll just bring this up. This is a future topic. This is a fun one. So the sports books all came out with their win totals. I forgot to include a link on the show, but you can look it up. Just Vegas Sports NBA win totals, and that's just what I'll say. I'll actually give my introduction, and then we can actually do our fun maybe next week, Brian, where I've talked about how trying to predict season totals for wins in the NBA is just futile. And let's just throw a few reasons out. Let's try and listicle it off the top of my head, Brian. I'm basically brainstorming an article that may or may not ever happen. One, you have no idea what coaches are going to do. That is always the problem. One of the most important things about projecting win totals in the NBA, either by game or by season, is projecting minutes. And coaches and GMs are so damned arbitrary with players that matter that we have no idea. We'll have players. Who is the one we always? I'm forgetting his name, Brian, but he was on Utah. He went to Dallas.
Oh, you're thinking of Jeremy Evans, I bet.
You are on the ball,
yeah,
Brian.
Yeah, no, I love Jeremy Evans, but He's probably never going to get any minutes.
Yeah, per minute, he's great. And that is a huge question. How many minutes he's going to get? And that's almost arbitrary. On the same minutes thing, you have no idea about players' health, right? Losing Kevin Durant for 10 games. I mean, what was the total, Brian? I think there was a point where 4 of your stars were injured. I think Clay, Draymond, Durant, and Curry were all injured at the same time at one point last season. Am I crazy?
Yeah, Durant was healthy for most of that Curry injury period, but I think you're right. He did miss part of it. And yeah, I think like their top 4 players were all missing. That sounds right.
Because I know what happened was, if I recall, Steph Curry, what was it, ankle or groin? What did he injure specifically?
Oh man, my groin hurts just thinking about that, but I can't remember what. Yeah, I think it might have been one of his ankles. I don't know. Sorry.
But to that point, so I'm going to get this up in front of me really quick. Okay, so that's funny. Nick Young played the most minutes or most games. Klay Thompson missed 9 games. Draymond Green missed 12. Kevin Durant missed 14, and Steph Curry missed 31. Right, those starters, you missed over 50 games out of your starters, who are amazing. The best starting, that is the best. The Hamptons 5 is the best starting 5 in the NBA. I've got no complaints with that. The freaking Rockets could compete if they would just stop wasting that 5th spot on stupid players. But it is what it is. You have no idea players are going to miss time due to injury, and that hugely impacts things. The other 2 is young players and old players, right? You don't know which productive old players are going to fall off this season, because some of them are, and you don't know which productive young players are going to break out, including rookies, right? We had no idea that Ben Simmons was going to break out last season. Like,
not just break out, be the best rookie since Tim Duncan. That almost never happens by definition.
Exactly. So there are 2 crops, reasonably sized crops, right? Like over 30 veterans, and I would say under 22 players on rookie contracts that have some really good players and really bad players, and we don't know which is which. We cannot. I can give you a distribution, which is probably accurate, but I can't tell you which player. So all of those things contribute very much so to why it is really, really hard to predict accurately what is going to happen in an NBA season. It's the unknown unknowns, which term. So it is an exercise in futility. Now, that being said, it's a fun game. So I'll say next week, Brian, I'll give you a chance, me a chance. We'll maybe throw out an email to Andrew and Patrick so they can get their words in.
Patrick next week, may be going to Vegas again this year, for all we know. I haven't talked to him about it. I don't know if you have, but he does go to Vegas every year.
He does, probably not till October, so the market will probably have shaken out. But I'll give that as homework. Look it up. There's some fun overs, for instance. The Spurs, I think the Spurs, the Thunder, and like one other team are all in the 40s. I think that's so easy. There's so many teams that I think the over on is easy, although the over is always frustrating because, as we noted, it's easy to bet the over, and then Nikola Jokic goes down injured, and you're like, well, there goes my over. So there are lots of fun. I'll give that as homework. We'll do that as next week's show, Brian, barring something else important coming up. I would be shocked if anything else happened this offseason. I am taunting you, though, NBA. Bring it on, right? I don't think there's anything interesting that can happen. I called the topical stories of this week, who cares? So I doubt anything happens. And if that's the case, next week we'll go over-unders for the NBA regular season.
Yeah, I'm showing them on the screen right now, and I won't say too much on them yet. But yeah, there's a few here that I think we will certainly question. Some very interesting ones. Okay. Well, if you have any shout-outs, go for it. Yeah, I did throw one shout-out on there, which is speaking of the NBA we were talking about a little bit earlier in the show. An all-time great just announced her retirement, Lindsay Whalen, who played 15 years in the WNBA. That's amazing. And, her career is getting all kinds of accolades, but I saw one tweet about her that I especially want to show. And I know you'll like this one, Dre. And this is from Lindsay Gibbs, a journalist who is one of the hosts of I want to say it's Burn It Down. Remember that podcast we were talking about a while back, a great women's sports podcast. And Lindsay Gibbs said on Twitter today, Lindsay Whalen was one of the first white athletes to get involved in the Black Lives Matter movement in 2016. She joined the 3 other Lynx captains, Moore Augustus and Brunson, to hold a pregame press conference about police brutality. This is months before anyone took a knee. So great player, Lindsay Whalen. Great career. Yeah, and by the way, so I've made the same mistake, so I want to give it its due diligence. If you don't subscribe to the Burn It All Down podcast.
The thing is, their Twitter handle is called Burn It Down Pod. The podcast is titled Burn It All Down.
So Which one did I say? I'm not sure.
You said Burn It Down, but I'm saying
okay.
It makes complete sense because the Twitter handle leaves out the all, but that probably makes sense for characters. So
there's a segment on the show too where they burn it down, and I don't know if it all gets burned down or not, but yeah, anyway.
I will give a negative shout out, by the way, Brian, an anti shout out to the FIDE website, which I tried to look up Sam Shankland on. Got like a connection refused error. So fantastic work, chess organization, on keeping things topical. I looked it up, though, Brian. He is ranked 44th.
Yes, good job.
So he's a top 50 player, but, certainly not going to be...
Yeah, I think USA has 3 top 10 ranked players now, so that was quite an upset for him to do that. Yeah, I think So, Nakamura, and Corona are all top 10. In fact, Corona is facing what's-his-name in the who you mentioned earlier, Carlson, for the world champion, I want to say. So, yeah, USA chess is looking good.
I'm going to give you a solid thing. Actually, yeah, do it, Corona. But I'm going to do the classic. We almost made it all the way through the show, Brian, but screw it. I'm going to get on our soapbox, which is the fuck Trump thing and this weird anti-immigration thing. I'm just going to make a bet here that Fabiana Corona didn't come over on the Mayflower, and I'm sick of the I would love the U.S.
I know a little about his history, Dre, before you go on your rant, which is he's born in America. I want to say he grew up in Florida. He went over and then played for Italy for a while, but then was lured back to play for America.
So, but let's make that the point, because that's the whole reason I said Mayflower and not immigrant is what bugs me, especially as a brown person in the United States. And I'll get another rant in. For my recent wedding anniversary, my wife and I went to Niagara Falls.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you. It was a fun trip, great trip. Here's the annoying part, and this really sucks, Brian. There are 2 sides of Niagara Falls. There's the Canadian side and the United States side. We ended up vacationing on the United States side, and actually, if you look up Niagara Falls, New York, it's just kind of a bummer. It's very Rust Belty almost. It's in New York, but it feels very Rust Belty, where there's been decline in industry and it's just gone downhill, and it's just not a great city. And part of the problem is Niagara Falls, Canada. They embraced tourism. They said, we're going to go with tourism. Niagara Falls, United States, said, we're going to try and attract industry back, and that failed. So we toured, and basically it's kind of a bummer. You look at Niagara Falls, Canada, which you can see. Like, you can see the Canadian side from the U.S. side. They've got like a Ferris wheel. There was a concert going on. And we just made a very astute observation that we weren't going to cross the U.S.-Canadian border because we have a young child. We didn't want anything to happen. We didn't have a long time for the vacation, so I didn't want anything to happen to me crossing the border. You hear horror stories about even people that are U.S. citizens or that have green cards that get, just detained at customs, and we didn't want to deal with that. And I was actually a little, despite the fact that I was happy for my wedding anniversary, a little upset. And so that's the point where there is this very weird polarization in the United States that obviously a large portion of it helped elect in Trump, and it frustrates me because it's going, we don't think of these people as real U.S. citizens. And I said on last week's show, or 2 weeks ago, it's when the best of us come together. So Fabiana Corona and myself, yes, we don't look like the freaking, like I said, the Mayflower, but it's still U.S. So it's like, I really wish that we as a nation would accept that it's our diversity that has made us a great thing and could give us a chess championship, which would be awesome, and start rejecting this bullshit that's going on. And I really vote tomorrow, by the way. Who knows if I'll get this up before tomorrow, Brian. I might get it. I'll try and get it up today. But yeah, it's an election day in some states, mine included. Please vote tomorrow. It's important.
Several battleground states, yeah.
Yep. That's all I got.
And you're right. If you look at every industry where the United States excels in, which is most of them, yeah, it's a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds.
Yeah, it's so freaking frustrating. Just the number of people that say like, oh, we need to go back to this era, and it's like, Silicon Valley alone that has so many billionaires. It's like, just go over like 3 generations back, for F's sake. Stop acting like immigrants to this country hurt it. All the economic data says the alternative, and it makes a lot of sense, by the way, Brian. It's when you talk Moneyball, to immigrate to a country requires a lot of effort on your part and financial down payment, right? You have to pay money to move. So if someone is willingly going through the effort of trying to get somewhere, that that means that they've already put in the work to do step one, which is a much harder criteria than other things. So it's like, I got nothing, Brian. We're a check the stats podcast, and it would be nice if people would do that.
Yeah, well, no one ever listens to us, and yeah, a lot of people aren't listening in Washington right now either.
All right. Well, here's hoping.
Thank you to those that are listening to us. It's like if you go to a party, the person who's there complains, no one showed up. Oh, except you guys that showed up. We're so glad that you're here. So I want to say that right now to everyone listening.
Actually, I'm going to need to find a way to stream this, man, because, yeah, you were right. There is a World Chess Championship coming up in November. I don't think, just on the ratings difference, I don't think the odds look good, but I'm definitely going to be watching that.
Yeah, Carlson has had it for several years now, so I don't know a lot about chess, unfortunately.
I ended up on a Bobby Fischer thing, and then if you start reading Bobby Fischer stuff, you end up on Magnus Carlsen. He's pretty amazing. So, yeah. Anyway, we might be a chess and politics show next week if we don't talk the over-unders. So, thanks for tuning in. As Brian said, we've been the Boxscore Geeks show. If you find us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We go live every week. We're on twitch.tv/nerd numbers. When we get regular enough is when I'll start tweeting and doing stuff. You've noticed I haven't done that yet. It's because we've yet to be regular, which I know is one of the key things you're supposed to do. Maybe we'll get there one day. If not, anyway, you can subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geek Show. If you missed the recaps of the live, if you want to see the recaps of the live show, you can catch them on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. I've been your host, Ray Alvarez. You can find me everywhere as Nerd Numbers. Co-host Brian Foster, you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian, and co-host in spirit Patrick Minton, you can find on Twitter as NBA Geek. That's been your show. Order a cookie, and we'll see you next week.